Last year,
It's happened!
they went and took it.
He struck him out looking!
This year,
The Texas Rangers win the World Series!
they're here to run it back.
It's over!
This is Bleav in Texas Rangers, hosted by Mitch Ferreldis.
Welcome into this week's episode of Bleav in Texas Rangers. The Rangers coming off of just a win in St. Louis, going 1 for 3 in the Gateway City. And now they're making their way to the Northeast Coast, Boston, Massachusetts, and a historic venue right after going to Busch Stadium, now that I think about it. And I thought that there was no better person to get some insight on this year's Boston Red Sox team than someone that I worked closely with at my secondary job at Arizona Sports. But now Jordan Leandre is busy writing for Beyond the Monster, and he's got a podcast of his own, the Pesky Report podcast, which you can find wherever you get your podcasts. Jordan, so good to see you, man. How you been?
Man, I've been great. It's great to see you too. It's nice to see you still working hard. I remember being not too far away from you desk wise at Arizona Sports, so it's crazy seeing that.
Yeah, now Jordan is working as hard as anybody I know. And this is a man that he's deep rooted when it comes to Boston sports teams. So I figured there was no one better to ask. I do want to go into like specific questions, of course, about the team, but I just want to start from like the 30,000 foot view, because my anticipation or my perspective of what the Red Sox was and is now are two completely different things when you think about how last season ended and where they are right now, very much in the thick of this wild card race in the American League, but also very much above 500 in a aggressive American League East.
Yeah, I mean, your view from where you're sitting is not that far away from where Red Sox fans were sitting back in February and March. A lot of people thought this team would have been lucky to win 75 games, and obviously they haven't reached that plateau yet, but I would assume they probably will exceed it. Yeah, it's crazy. The pitching staff under Andrew Bailey's been awesome, or it's tapered off a little bit in recent weeks, but they carried the team early. They battled through injuries. They were hovering around 500, I think, within a game for about 3 straight weeks in June. And now they've soared into, like you said, right in the thick of the playoff picture, which based on the offseason, based on preseason expectations, I would not have expected them to be really close, probably closer to where the Rangers are sitting right now from a distance from the wild card spot. I would have probably expected these two teams to have been flipped going into this first matchup with each other.
But it's kind of funny how baseball works, right? Like almost every year there's that one team that surprises. And I don't know if I want to say specifically the Red Sox are the team that have surprised me the most, because in the National League, we've had a surge with the New York Mets. The Padres have had a very much bounce back season despite trading away Juan Soto. But I do give a lot of credit to this Red Sox team that has stuck with their current manager in Alex Cora. They had the change in the offseason in the front office. And then, as you mentioned, the pitching coach. And that's what I want to touch on here, because this is a team that traded away Chris Sale. They signed Lucas Giolito, but then lose him for the year in spring training. And yet this team is getting carried by Tanner Houck's all-star season and Cutter Crawford and Cooper Criswell, right?
Yeah, it's seriously, it's crazy to think about it. Like Tanner Houck, because of the Giolito injury, was guaranteed a rotation spot. There were talks going into spring training about whether or not he'd even make the rotation, whether he'd be thrown to the bullpen. It was kind of a race between him and Garrett Whitlock, who they've also lost for the season after a strong April. They both ended up in the rotation because of injuries to Giolito and the trade of Chris Sale and a lackluster offseason on the pitching front other than the Giolito signing. So the fact they've gotten to this point speaks volumes to the message that Andrew Bailey sends, the kind of the buy-in that Alex Cora has gotten from everybody from the top down, whether it be, Rafael Devers as the team's best player down to the end of the bench guys. There's been total buy-in. And it really speaks volumes to, it's not necessarily about the most talented roster. It's about how guys fit together, how guys, kind of vibe together, the buy-in, just the want to. And that's what this Red Sox team kind of exudes. It's just that grit that even if they don't make the playoffs, they're going to be a tough team to face down the stretch. It's very different than in years past. They're a young team, so they're they're going to think that they can beat you no matter, how different the talent disparity is. And it's great to see.
I think the breakout season 2 from Jarren Duran, who's been one of the team's top prospects for a few years. Last year, he gets significant playing time towards the end of the year and doesn't. I'm not going to say blew anybody away, but I think it was evident what his talent was and his talent level could be. And this year, he's an all-star and the all-star game MVP. I have to imagine that he's been a big catalyst as to why they've been so successful this year.
Yeah, definitely. He sort of broke out. We saw the piece, like the flashes in 21 and 22, but there was this trend of he'd come up, he'd light the world on fire for a couple weeks, then he would crater and no bounce back. 2023, he had the hot start, then cratered for like 3 weeks, and then rebounded. And that was the first time the major leagues have ever seen Jarren Duran do that. And then this year, those little peaks and valleys, like the really bad stretches of Jarren Duran are like 3 games, 4 games, 5 games tops, as opposed to 3 straight weeks. And that's how he ends up being an all-star caliber player, ends up going to the all-star game and winning all-star game MVP. And he was having something of an identity crisis those first couple years, is like who he was going to be at the major league level. And he's gotten back to being a gap to gap guy with some surprising power from time to time. Has always been strong enough to hit home runs, but now he's not really going for them. They're just happening naturally. And his defense has been sublime this season. And that was always a weakness for him the last few years. So he's been, like you said, the catalyst of this whole thing. Him and Rafael Devers have been the two faces of the franchise. And honestly, you could see that happening for years to come.
So you mentioned I guess I don't want to steal words from you, but from the offset, it looks like a lackluster offseason. Like the biggest signing that they made was Giolito, who then gets hurt for the year. They make the Tyler O'Neill acquisition in the offseason, and that has very much paid dividends. What is the relationship right now with the fan base and the ownership group, who have now moved off of several significant pieces over the last few years? Like, if you were to timeline it from the Mookie Betts trade to now, what would you say the relationship status is?
Well, I think it's going to take a while for there to be trust in the fan base and fan base having trust in ownership because of what happened with Mookie Betts. And then a couple of years later with Xander Bogaerts, you lose, these marquee players that are homegrown, whether it was the right decision or not, maybe more so in the Bogaerts case. The fan base really, really doesn't trust the ownership group, which is crazy because then they gave the richest contract in team history to Rafael Devers not too far, not too much after the fact of Bogaerts leaving. But it's kind of more of like I'll believe it when I see it type of deal for them. Like when ownership starts spending money again, like the Yankees do and the Dodgers do, maybe not as extreme as how the Dodgers do it, but they're in the top 3 in payroll. Fans will probably start to feel a little bit better about ownership. But yeah, no, there's definitely some friction between the two still. And even it feels like the vibe in the fan base is they're winning in spite of ownership. And that's kind of how it's been even the last few years. It's been whatever they're doing is in spite of ownership. And if they lose, it's because of ownership.
So is a simple solution just winning the whole darn thing? It would be the first one since 18, right?
Yeah, the longest drought of it feels for like forever since the Red Sox. I'm spoiled.
Coming from a Boston sports fan,
Yeah.
come on,
I'm spoiled.
on.
I'm spoiled. I was born in 2000, and all my teams have done is win since. So, but yeah, no, it's win the whole thing, and I think even at that point, there still won't be a ton of trust in ownership. They'll still have to spend in the offseason for people to buy into them. Now, Breslow and Cora, they're the fan base seems to love the two of them. I mean, maybe less so with Breslow because he's still relatively new, but yeah.
Well, he was a former pitcher for them at one point, wasn't he? Like he
Yeah.
briefly had a stint. Okay, so I mean, I guess there's some familiarity there. He's obviously new to the position, but I mean, so far with the moves that he's made, it seems like it's relatively speaking worked out for them. Okay, we're talking with Jordan Leandre. He has his own podcast covering the Red Sox called the Pesky Report, and he also does a lot of writing for Beyond the Monster, covering the Red Sox, and he's really into the minor league circuit too. So if you want your updates on minor league Boston Red Sox, like Jordan's a guy to go to. He really knows his stuff. You mentioned the name Alex Cora, and it's kind of at least from my perspective, you can disagree or agree. It's a tricky relationship. Comes in 2018 and brings all the glory, of course. But then there's the results and fallout from the Astros sign stealing scandal when he was a coach in Houston. Took time away from the team, but now he's back and he's extended. What is the feeling around Alex Cora from your perspective?
Yeah, the last couple of years, because I feel like managers only get hired to get fired. Like at a certain point, it's going to run its course where the fan base seems to really think that the manager's on the hot seat. I think there were a couple times it got there with Cora the last couple of years. Um, I'm just amazed that they were able to get an extension done, because even in spring training, the vibe was, I don't want to talk about contracts during the season. There was a lot of reports that there was no way he was going to come back. I remember on national broadcast, they were talking about the Dodgers, even the Yankees as possible landing spots for him in the offseason. And now he's here for the next 3 years. So, starting next 3 years. So he's going to be of a face of this franchise too. He's a draw for players, especially the Latin players. He's been great with young players, so it's really, a match made in heaven here with the Red Sox, because they have so many great young and Latin players like Jaron Duran and him. It's like almost like a father son connection in that dugout. They seem to love each other. Devers, same deal with Cora. As far as the fan base goes, like what you brought up with ownership, winning cures all. With managers, it really does. They win. They like the way the team looks, how hard they play. People are going to love Cora. I love Cora. I mean, again, I'm a fan, so I definitely get caught up in the how could you make that call? Why would you go to this guy when this guy was available, when I don't know anything, in the grand scheme of things. So, but largely, I think the Red Sox and their fan base are aware that they are probably one of the best set up organizations from a managerial standpoint. That's nice. It keeps the continuity.
All right, last Red Sox related question that I have, and this is kind of a business related question. So if you do your best with this, but I figure since you watch the Red Sox all the time, you're either have access to or subscribe to Nesson in some way, shape, or form, the Northeast Sports Network. And for the Rangers, they're under the Diamond Sports Group umbrella still. They have this current 1 year contract that they have with Bally's. Are you feeling any rumblings, or is it just kind of a non-starter as far as dealing with RSNs, because the one that the Red Sox have is owned by the team that promotes the Red Sox?
Yeah, I don't think there's any sort of rumblings or rumors about them being on another network at any point in the near or distant future. It feels like Nesson is kind of going to be their. I mean, and it could change at any moment. I just haven't heard. I haven't heard anything. I think it's better for the team to have an organization like Nesson running it, because there's so much more freedom. They got all the Sox legends and whatnot that are always kind of hanging around. And it makes way too much sense for them to stick with Nesson. But again, like these kinds of things, and I don't want to act like an expert because I'm over here in Massachusetts, but you see what happens with other teams and how their kind of TV deals seem to get a little crazy. It doesn't seem like that's going to happen in Boston, but I know it can happen at a moment's notice. So I don't want to pretend like there's nothing to worry about, but I think they're pretty good on that front.
So I don't mean to pour salt in any potential Mavericks fans that may be listening, but what was it like winning title number 18?
Oh, it was super. It was nice. It was so it it was nice that people wanted to pretend like the Mavericks really stood a chance. I got a little arrogant with the Celtics. It's like, I mean, they were so historically great all season, and people acted like them winning in five. Like, I understand that the guys got hurt, but also they were the best team in basketball by far this season. They get into the NBA Finals against a team that had really two scorers, and then like one of PJ Washington or one of the bigs could get you like 10 to 12 on any given night, but the Celtics could just beat you in so many ways. And then Porzingis had his little flurry to start the game, start the finals in game one, and like that set the tone for me. Once I saw how he erupted, even though he wasn't himself and got hurt again in the series, there was like a deer in the headlights look for the Mavericks, and I just didn't see a chance that they were going to win. Now, I will admit, losing by 40 in Game 4 at least crept a little doubt in my head because that's a substantial loss. But I didn't think the Celtics really had a chance of losing. They were just too much better than the rest of the field.
Well, hopefully the people that stuck around didn't get pissed off having that salt poured in the wound. Jordan, good to catch up with you, man. Hope everything's been well for you over there on the East, and keep grinding, man. I know the work's been good for you.
Likewise, man. I appreciate you having me on. I appreciate it.
And he's Jordan Leandre. Again, find his podcast, The Pesky Report, and then find his writing that he does for Beyond the Monster. That's going to do it for this episode of Bleav in Texas Rangers. We'll be back after this Red Sox series has concluded. So until then, Bleav in Texas Rangers.